Good afternoon. This is Jim Whitehead of All Power Group. This presentation is on generator service, and in some cases, you'll be surprised at some of the things we come up with. First of all, prime beginning service is where we put a cellular monitor on the unit. The reason we do that is because even though I try to just compare it to a car, it's basically where it got to be, since it's sitting in the backyard and no one's driving it to the store to say, oh, gee, we've got a problem. Somebody really has to have hands, as you might say, reaching in and being able to see exactly what's going on with the generator all the time. The other thing why we have to stay on top of it is generators only have one chance to start. They go to start and there's a problem, let's say low oil, RPM sense loss, the unit will go into what we call a fault. And the fault will keep that unit from doing anything until someone comes fix what the problem is. Inevitably it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And yes, I admit with a monitor, you're not going to be there 4 o'clock in the morning. But let's say that unit, and I'll talk about exercising in a little while, but let's say that unit was supposed to run on Monday and it faulted, and you now go into Tuesday night in a fault, and at 4 o'clock in the morning you lose power. Well, it didn't fault right at that point because it faulted the day before. You don't have a generator. The other good thing, and what's logical, is when you have to go to a generator more than just scheduled twice a year service, you're seeing that machine very, very regularly. And again, out of sight, out of mind. You want to make sure you're seeing what's going on with the service. When I first started putting monitors on generators, people would say, wow, gee, that's going to make your job easier. And I said, well, maybe, but if your machine has a problem, which I would take care of anyway. If I didn't know then, I'd find out later. But if I know that it happened today, my rule of thumb was always to be on site in reference to a fault, either the same day or worst case the next. So you basically drop the point of where there's going to be problems and you don't know anything about it. As time went on, I had about 1/3 of my customers monitored. I was selling the monitors with an install fee, and I just realized that not having everybody monitored was generally not good for me, and it was a disservice to the customer. So I started including the cost of the monitor and installation in my service plan. So yes, the first year monitors were about $350. I was taking a hit, but it would be providing better service, and if you give better service, the customer's happier, and you continue keeping the customer as a customer. So that was the main point. After the first year, you only have to pay a $99 a year cellular fee for the monitoring. Now, the next big area of service is battery. We routinely, at the very least, change a battery every 2 years, but that might be too little. The customer doesn't want to pay for a battery too often. Bottom line, you have to make sure that they have a battery that's going to last. Now, what you're seeing in the picture is one of the batteries I used over the years. By the way, I've done generator service for 18 years. Things have changed. Things have gotten better. I use this Odyssey battery in a lot of cases. In fact, I just put my on my own unit, 48 kW. I installed just before last hurricane season. I installed an Odyssey battery. They're about 3 times the price of a standard lead acid battery, but they last 3 times as long. And I mean they do. So they're worth the price. And too often when I would see going to a new customer service, they would have an El Cheapo battery installed, and they're okay for a while, but they're not built to the extent where you're sure that they're going to have some longevity, and you really need to make sure the generator is going to run. So, as I said, back to the monitor issue, you don't want the generator keeping secrets from you. The next area that's important is oil. You can see in the presentation, the picture, that's Generac oil. It's typically synthetic, and their best choice is 5W30. Now, what happens with these units, and when I first started doing service many years ago, I was doing oil over and over and over and over, and really it turned out that was, in essence, a waste of money because they run so little. And what I said I was going to talk about, they exercise in the area of 5 minutes, 12 minutes, 20 minutes once a week under no load. And if they have no other power outages, that's all they run. So the oil in itself does not break down. I mean, certainly if you take your car and you go on a long trip and you're running your car from a good long time, the oil kind of gets dirty, breaks down. It really isn't the way it was when it first went in. So we really, even though they don't run very much, we basically ensure that the oil is at its condition. The other thing on the air-cooled product, those are the 20 kWs, 22, 24, 26 kWs. They're air-cooled, and they only hold 1.5 quarts of oil. Now, it's not that they burn oil, but especially here in Florida, when they're running, they get pretty darn hot, and the engine oil gets hot. So I always have felt that there's a tendency for vaporizing some of the oil. And again, when you only have a quart and a half, it doesn't take long before you're going to have an oil shutdown. Now, the good news is the unit protects itself. When the oil gets low, the oil pressure drops, and when it drops to a certain point, the unit says, I'm sorry, I can't run, I'm going to go into a fault. So that's good. You don't hurt the engine, but you don't have a generator until somebody comes to take care of the oil. Now, the larger liquid cooled that are 27 kW and up in the past were generally Ford engines, Chevrolet, Mitsubishi, Chrysler, and Hyundai. And since they were car engines, they only had 4.5 quarts of oil, which is better than 1.5 quarts of oil. Still, they would, after running for many hours, they would start to drop some oil. In 2019, Generac came out with their redesigned 48 kW, and it went from being an 8-cylinder 5.4 liter Ford down to basically a Chevrolet engine 4.5 liter 4-cylinder, which is a big engine for only 4-cylinder, but it was designed that way, and the amount of oil is 12 quarts. So you're going to be able to run hours and hours and hours without getting to a point where the unit is going to shut down because of low oil pressure. The larger Generac that go in like the 100s, 130s, 150s, they're basically that 4.5 liter engine doubled. So it's a 9-liter engine, but still holding a lot of oil. Speaking of running time, with Irma in 2017, I had customers running up to 13 days straight. You know that unit is working hard and it's hot, and you're going to have some fault. So now we, having it extended out as much as they can run, still have to have the monitor that will let you know when there's a problem, and there will in that 13 days. Oil filters, they go hand in hand with oil. Again, they keep the oil clean. Now, speaking about oil clean and also oil being cooler, on the air-cooled units, and you'll see a picture as I get a little further in the presentation, they have oil cooler. It's a device that goes from out of the engine through a cooler, which is cooled by all the fans that are blowing around the generator, and then go back in the engine. When it goes back in the engine, the temperature of the oil has dropped and certainly doing a lot better. Oil filters can really restrict flow. So again, very important to stay on top of making sure that you do these oil changes. Now, maintenance with radiators and cooling. Because generators are sitting still, they don't have any natural flow of air. With a car, you're driving along the highway, air is being pulled through the front of the car via fan and basically going through the radiator, and the radiator runs the fluid through, and the air cools, takes some of the heat out of the coolant, and it keeps just going around and around. So one of the things that will happen, you've got a fan belt, because the fan is on a belt, so you got to keep on the fan belt, because if the fan belt breaks, you basically will have no cooling. So again, another issue to ensure that you're taking care of the fan belt. They also can go down and have some of the coolant go down low, and you will have a high temp shutdown or a low coolant sensor shutdown. And in some cases, a lot of the issues that go off with generators on faults, it's not really a big problem. This coolant issue that I'm just discussing, in some cases, it's only a dirty coolant sensor. So really you're not low on coolant and you're doing fine with the flow of coolant and the radiator and the fan belt. But because the coolant sensor is dirty, it basically will think the unit's got low coolant, so it will shut down. So many times you go to a machine, you find the coolant's fine. It's just you've got to pull out the coolant sensor and clean it. So again, it could be a big problem or not a big problem, but the same result is your machine shuts down and goes into fault. Going back to the air-cooled unit, when I first started working on generators right after Hurricane Wilma in 2005, I was very uncomfortable with air-cooled generators, only because Florida is so hot. And I was a motorcycle guy back then. I might not look like I was, but I was. And I never bought Harleys because Harleys are air-cooled. I bought Hondas that were water-cooled. They had a radiator just like the generator, and it would keep basically the engine much cooler, the oil cooler, so on and so forth. But what I found with the air-cooled, they have so many fans, and they're revving pretty much at 3,600 RPMs, that there is a lot of air going through that radiator from one side to the other side. And also, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that the oil cooler is getting a lot of this air, and it's helping keeping the oil cooler than it would be without it. Now, you're also seeing on this picture what is considered the main part of the generator. The engine is just running these, what we call a rotor and stator. You can have a great running engine and not have any power because of the rotor stator. It's been damaged, it's failed, it's not creating any electric power. And, not that you'll be tested on this, but the Faraday's principle of the law of induction is what happens when you're spinning, in essence, a magnet inside a magnetic field. It basically will produce power. Now, fans in the air-cooled, they're doing a great job with pushing a lot of air through both this rotor and stator, so they stay pretty cool, and I really haven't seen heat failures from this happening. Now, that's, again, not be tested, but the Faraday's law is just the principle of how generators work, and what they're showing you is they're putting a coil in through a rolled coil, and what it does is, with power being applied, even though it's a small amount, as the more power is produced through the coil, it in essence increases and puts out electric power, and G would be something showing you that you're generating electric power. Now, this is what I say jokingly is the hidden, buried, out of sight, out of mind problem, necessity, and that is your gas, your fuel. People look at a generator, it's sitting nice and pretty on a slab, it's all hooked up. You don't even think of that you have, in most cases, a buried, out of sight, out of mind, propane tank. And also what happens is there's so many legs of the production to ensure that this tank is working right, enough gas is getting to the generator, that it is so important, and that's one of the biggest parts of the service, is ensuring that everything that is related to that gas tank is working. For example, you have the gas lines from the generator to the generator. You have a gas regulator at the tank, which is considered a first stage regulator. You have another gas regulator by the generator, which is a second stage regulator. And you also have a demand regulator inside the generator. So what we're dealing with is, and especially with heat, and this is why everything has to be sized correctly, and we make gas piping much larger than it was years ago because of the increased heat that we're having here in Florida. We can, in some cases, develop a problem called vapor lock. But the biggest thing that we want to ensure that we're keeping an eye on is the level of gas in the tank, the pressure, the volume, the flow. And when you're looking now at a tank cover, that's what is above ground, the only thing above ground. The next picture, it's an opened top. And what you're seeing is as I mentioned, the first stage regulator. That brings tank pressure, which is 250 PSI, down to 10 PSI. And then it goes over to the generator, and you have to make sure there's plenty of volume and pressure going to the generator. Because what happens is when a generator is under load, and since the load varies, you basically have to make sure that there's plenty of gas there in the sense of volume, that when the generator says, I need more gas, it has more gas. Now back to looking at down inside this tank. That is a relatively new setup and a clean setup. Over the years, you would be probably surprised what basically you find down there. Ants, snakes, various bug infestations, water. I had one that a bunch of honeybees decided to make it their home. Good choice in the sense of logic, because it has a hole in the top and it's relatively protected from weather and whatever. They just don't know that obviously, hopefully, if you've got good service, somebody's going to be coming and opening that up. And that's when you get the best and biggest surprise. So even though we talk about, and you think of services, well, I need to change my oil, I need to change my filter, I need to do my battery, there is so much more that basically gets into ensuring that you've got a good generator, a functioning generator, a generator that is putting out the correct power. And when we talk about power, the engine could be running great, but if there's a problem with the output of that rotor stator I mentioned, and the proper output is, and this is the same as you would be getting from your utility, 240 volts split into 120, 120 at 60 cycle. You have two 120 lines and what they call a neutral. And I don't want to turn this into an electrical exercise, but the 120, 120 are very important because half your house is on one of the 120 legs, and the other half of your house is on the other 120. Your AC, for example, pool pumps, sprinkler pumps, they're well pumps, they typically are 240 volts, so they would be picking up both legs of that 120 to be 240. And you need to be 60 cycles. That's the hertz. And of any power that's wrong is the hertz. It's got to be very accurate to 60 cycles, or you will damage equipment. Now, I alluded to a neutral wire. It's a white wire. Basically, what that does is it goes in the line along with your two 120s, and all it's designed to do is to balance those two 120s. And this will happen, a neutral will go bad, you will still be getting 240, but it might be 140 and 100 on, 140 on one leg, 100 on the other leg. So that means half your home is going to be not getting enough power. The other half is going to get too much power. I've had people say, we were in the kitchen, and all of a sudden the kitchen light blew up. And that's a dead giveaway that that particular set of breakers that are on that 120 leg is too high. So the neutral keeps it balanced. Now, the good and bad news, there's a transfer relay that's in the transfer switch, constantly monitoring what voltages are and what the hertz are. And what happens if you lose power, your generator will start up in about 10 seconds, and that transfer relay is looking for the correct power. And it has to be what I just said, 120, 60 cycles. If it is not seeing that power, it basically will not transfer. So you might get a call where it says, gee, my generator's running, we're out of power, but I'm not on the generator. Now, admittedly, that could be about 10 different other reasons, but the good news is the relay protects your home. But if somebody hasn't been checking that generator and it's just a minor issue and it's not putting out correct power, again, you'll have a running generator, good engine, but you'll have the wrong power and you will not have a generator. So, we do compare them to cars, but the problem with them being in the backyard and kind of out of sight, out of mind, and again, talking about the gas, you may think you have a generator, don't have a generator. I want to thank you. I hope you've picked up something from this. Please ask questions. I'm here. Yes, I've gotten older, and thank goodness, even being older, I haven't forgotten generator service and or how to repair and help you with anything else that might make sense. But again, this is Jim Whitehead. I want to thank you very, very much. All Power Group. Please like and subscribe. And again, pleasure, and thank you very much. Take care.